behalf of M. Moser, we'd just like to say thank you for joining us. And today is really about an opportunity to bring everyone together, view of our supply chain, focusing on some of the challenges, but also the opportunities in our industry, and hopefully sharing some knowledge and successes across the board. So the first one, there's a lot of shifts in our industry at the moment, especially between post-pandemic hybrid working. So Sophia, maybe you can start us off. How are you seeing your product offering changing as a result of some of these external pressure points?
I mean, I would say that change is always positive, regardless of where it comes from. And I think in our own experience being a multi-material facilitator, we have seen a lot of materials being taken into consideration as a replacement to poplar wood, for example, and this has created a lot of interest to other type of sources of, panelization. So from recycling paper to hemp panels to other bio-based material that actually could replace poplar wood. So in a way, I think pressure in terms of, in general change for the pandemic as well have created a lot of more interest into health, and therefore what materials are made of.
We focus on trying to use FSC woods as a base for most of our materials, and FSC has become increasingly harder. It's a conflict timber now, plywood, so that has created a huge price spike. I mean, it's tripled in some cases more, and that's made us have to completely relook at our supply chain, and we've gone all through literally the world of panel products. Now looking at eucalyptus. It's a very fast-growing hardwood, and it's something which I'd never even heard of before. And it's one of these things we also looked at poplar, but obviously all of these things, they have strengths and weaknesses, and you have to then reevaluate back to your end client, which can often be a tricky conversation, especially as it's moving really fast. It's happened more than once in the past year, so it's hard to go back again. So it's a tricky thing now.
Yeah, I would really echo both of those, that there's that real awareness of the supply chain, because sort of so many aspects unravelled through the pandemic, so that real consideration and mindfulness of where materials actually come from, and also that focus on well-being that Sophia mentioned. I think, just how much our interiors need to sort of enhance our lives, and almost looking at how people are going to come back to the office in terms of it almost being a destination design, because if people have got used to working from home, then what is it that a workplace environment needs to offer in terms of really being an attractive space, a good space for collaboration. People have maybe been used to very quiet spaces at their homes, and then if you come back into an open plan office, dealing with the acoustic challenges, things like that, and just really adapting to personal differences, I think.
Beyond government-instituted policies, I know there are a lot of things, but what are some key initiatives for your company taking in mind to battle climate change?
We try and take waste as a feedstock, and we try and relook at it as something we can use as a raw material. And we're a very small company, so from our point of view, making an impact is really hard. And the past couple of years has taught us really that we've got to think more about process design, and then look at larger companies and say, here's some processing for these raw materials that come out normally pre-consumer, so they'll never go into the supply chain of our everyday world, and they're normally burnt or buried or energy reclamation or something like that. So you have this difficult thing. So we're now really looking at how do you take a small prototype plant and then develop it to a proof of concept, and then go through to a larger company and say, here you go, here's a £100 million concept. Or that this fit exactly into your current process, and we proved it. You don't have to do all the tests yourself. And I think that without the involvement of large companies and non-governmental, it's got to be private companies in pushing this forward, the panel industry is going to struggle to meet any of the goals.
We've got quite an interesting product actually called Really, so it's end-of-life textiles made into a solid textile board or an acoustic felt. And I think it's quite interesting now, the kind of conversations that we're having with our customers around actually, can you come in, can you see kind of like what products that we actually have within our buildings right now that we can kind of actually give back to you and then get something back. that you've made out of it. So I think it's a really kind of nice area for us to kind of look at circularity, to try and say, well, actually, of course, you know, we want to stay in business, we want to keep designing buildings, we want to keep filling them with products, but how can we do this in the best way? So if we can actually start and kind of build relationships really early on and maybe kind of get involved with auditing people's businesses, their workplace, to see actually what materials do you have that we could do something with. So I'm really sort of fascinated actually about what you guys are doing and actually how you're getting in there really and getting these products out, because we're just at the start of our journey almost trying to see, okay, well, where is the largest quantity? And for us, you see a big curtain there, like that's what I talk to our clients about. If you have a lot of curtains in your building, this is a good material for us to get back, because of course if it's furniture or workstation screens, it could easily be glued on, or there might be some foreign kind of like, you know, FR chemicals on the back of it that maybe make recycling it challenging. But yeah, it's very interesting to see how you're kind of doing.
Recycling is a really interesting word because it means virtually nothing and everything.
Right, yeah, true.
So taking waste and reusing it, and looking at it with all its blemishes as well and saying, well, we're going to do the least worst with it, is kind of the way we look at it. It might still have nasties in it, but we're not binning these nasties and leaving them to leach out over things we're going to treat in a certain way. It's really hard. It's a new category, really, of materials.
I think it's helpful from a design perspective, being able to see some examples, like exemplary, even if I don't necessarily like that finish, or I want it in a different color, or there's room to maneuver. I need the baseline. But if it's just, this is what we do, and you're like, I can't really wrap my head around how to put this into a specification because I don't actually know how to use it. So that's really helpful.
And especially from a company like us, like, you know, we are colour, you know, we are texture, that's what Quadrat do. But then, you know, with our product, actually, we don't use any water and we don't use any dye. So it basically, you know, if you give me this colour, like this is what you get back in the board. So again, that's something that I think it's the education with the designers to say, maybe you can't design like you used to design, because you can't have every colour if you want to have this sort of sustainable story as well. So I think it's like that kind of interplay, isn't it, between us and you to say, well, look, if you want it pink, then, you know, obviously there's a compromise there with our kind of sustainability strategy.
I think one of the big points that we have to try and get our head around here is the aspect of dealing with legacy products, i.e. products that we used to design in a linear design method of taking, making and then wasting, and how we transition that to a circular solution. Because the recycling, reuse, repurposing of those legacy products is important, but they may not be the feedstock into the new generation of products that we are designing with circularity in mind. So not only I think we got to think about what do we do with the products that we made yesterday, as well as what the solution's going to be for the products that we're designing today, which may come back in a number of years, and then added a third complexity of what we're going to do about the products that we're designing tomorrow, or for 10 years in hand.
I'd say the biggest issue is petrochemical binders. You take anything here, smash it up, glue it back together with epoxy, you've got a product. You want a non-petrochemical binder, very different conversation. And learning about that, I mean, you go back to Roman times and have lime cement. This is a tremendous binder that exists in the world, it actually eats carbon, it's a beautiful thing, but we don't use it for very many things. But these things do exist, but that's also the purview of large chemical companies. And they are moving towards it. BASF, huge company, are moving towards water-based acrylic binders for these sorts of things. And it's really interesting looking a lot at like long polymer products like hemp, the sort of thing that will bind things together. You'll never get the look of that perfect thing.
Well, but then the shift is really about education.
Yeah,
so I believe
absolutely.
that we are used to things that last forever, but we are realizing that actually petrochemical production have created a massive problem. They last really forever, and they are forever with us. And so we start placing them into panels and other things just to hide them somewhere. It's almost like a storage for a problem that we don't know exactly how to solve. And in a way, I think it's interesting. I work very often in the edge of the crazy new materials happening, and I can tell you that somebody in the US has invented a glue that it's based on mussels, and it's developed through soya beans, because obviously you can't pretend to, extract protein from mussels to make, worldwide glue available. But soya is available worldwide because we use it as a feedstock for animals. So somebody has invented a glue that resists water, that resists all possible complex situations, and it's completely bio-based. So I think we are going to see a massive shift in the new binding agents of the future. And to reply to your question, I think, yeah, there is a board material at the moment that uses no formaldehyde and is actually made with enzymatic treatment. So it's bacteria basically that, create the glue for the material to be binded together. So I think there is a beautiful transformation, and university are very often the hub of it. And so in a way, I think the next thing I would say is that we work massively close to university to discover and discuss and educate new generation as well on the problems, because they are going to be the demanding designer of the future, requiring things to be actually done completely circular, as you were saying.
It's about policy change though, isn't it, as well? It's just like if it doesn't come from kind of government level, then, if the big companies with all of the money still want to keep making it for as long as they can.
In panel materials, there's a monopoly of mills, and it is 3 sort of interest groups that own everything in the whole world. They have no interest in switching unless forced by law. So you have these people that have no interest in the global side of it, which is this is where the binder, like the soil binder and other binders that are going on, they can like for like replace urea formaldehyde. There is no doubt, but no one's going to stop their £150 million line to try out this new product.
Are you seeing a big uptake in the industry with your carbon calculator?
Yeah, very much so. I think because it's so specific and interactive, we're getting a lot of engagement from designers because they can really see how their individual design choices can change that carbon footprint of an interior, and really just look at alternatives and how it can make a difference. And I think the other thing it's doing is really just raising that visibility and transparency of carbon footprint. So it's now really becoming a kind of a front of mind factor in terms of specification, maybe perhaps in the way that recycled content figure would have been maybe 5 or 10 years ago. So it's really just a great sort of conduit into that conversation.
We were playing around with it actually at our studio the other day. So if we were going to go with product X versus product Y, what does this look like and how does that change things? It was quite eye-opening.
Yeah, and it can really sort of, make you sort of think, well, do we really want that aesthetic?
Yes.
Or actually, is there a different sort of performance or aesthetic trade-off for a certain part of the building? That just absolutely makes sense to strip some carbon footprint out.
Have you noticed it affecting your orders? And could you tell us maybe how that conversation is starting to evolve?
Our clients do want carbon neutral, which again we're offering across the board because it's just become so important. But then, as well as that overall carbon neutral status, they're wanting to know that next level of detail behind as well. And really, I think it can just help drive that engagement of the conversation, because sometimes some of the things that you do as a manufacturing company, they're not that glamorous, but they're really important in terms of driving down carbon footprint. And when you've got that overall story, it helps to sort of really communicate the other things that you're doing behind the scenes.
We are a responsible manufacturer, and we've seen a huge pickup on inquiries relating to carbon neutral products. And the laminate stands completely separate from our competitors because we've actually introduced a special product in our resin, a natural abundant product called lignin. And this has, again, really helped with the whole carbon neutral story and supplying a product that really enhances the laminate, but actually doesn't compromise on quality and appearance.
As a designer, I would say it's becoming more important. So it may not be sexy, but we still want to know, because at the end of the day, even if I want a project to be net zero, I don't just want it to be carbon offset across the board just to get that status. I want to know that you're doing things differently. That's the purpose of the whole thing.
It's so important, isn't it? We've been talking a lot about offsetting recently because we've signed up for the Science Based Target Initiative this year. So we're on the kind of race to net zero with a target of 2040. So obviously we've got that 10%, like you were saying, that we can kind of offset if we need to. But we were hearing from some clients that, okay, well, maybe you should bring a little bit of offsetting into the conversation as well. So you've got kind of like your very short term and then your long term goals as well. But it's just interesting to hear what you're saying. So you're offering kind of like an option, are you, to clients to say, would you like to offset the emissions from this product used in your site?
taken it away from being an option to being something that we do standard and globally. So we basically offset all of the impact of our product, including all the raw materials, and have that third party verified through EPDs, so that it's very much measured, measurable, and then, you know, the last step is that we offset. But it really is important that, you know, you're not just using an offset to, you know, really be, okay, it doesn't matter what that environmental footprint was in the first place. It's very much about, okay, we've minimised it with the materials and methods that are available at the moment. And while we're working on sort of further reducing, we'll offset the balance. And I think what we're seeing as an organisation is that internally it's really helping us drive those conversations, because now there's you know, this purchase of an offset, it's what do we need to do to keep driving that down as we're growing as an organisation. So I think it's sort of helping to sort of accelerate that innovation that we've kind of always been known for, but really kind of have a focus on it specifically with regard to carbon as well.
It's something that we're actually requesting more and more often, and I'm sure everyone here will get to this at some point with our company, but asking for carbon values on the products so we can start to ascertain ourselves. So even if you don't have a calculator in-house, we can understand how that's affecting our own projects as well, so we can start to be better educated.
I also think there is something that we need to remember always. APDs are obviously a great system because it's the only certification that help us compare product, because you can pretty much, you know, see the carbon emission for it. But for example, we represent a company that does a clay plaster, and they are so green, I would say, that they don't even pigment the clay. The clay is the true color that is found on site. So say if they want to actually certify all their product, they will have to certify every single clay color available, because it's, you know, everyone has a different composition. So I find that I agree with you, like it's a process and we are all trying to navigate waters, but also we need to be very careful of like identifying an APD or a certification with necessarily being better than. I think there is a quite interesting openness that manufacturer can have, and they can actually be completely truthful of what is inside their product. And it becomes more of openness to declare exactly what you're buying. It's almost like a food recipe, right? You know if somebody put in some milk or anything that you're allergic to. And I think it's important to navigate this, and it doesn't mean that if somebody has an APD, it's for sure more sustainable than somebody that doesn't.
But sometimes that's the perception, isn't it? Oh, you have it, okay, great. Like,
And
you know, is anybody actually
boxes.
analysing that? But because we talk about that as well, that, you know, almost like these, you know, the impact documentation came about maybe from more like mono materials like glass, concrete, and kind of like, yeah, you come to a company like Quadrat, and we've got 1,500 products, and then, you know, obviously we're a large global organisation, so there's a budget there to kind of keep the EPDs going, you know, to fund like the life cycle analysis and everything. But of course, it's a huge investment to keep that going, but then something hugely important to us, because then at least we can show this is the global warming potential of this product. But then, yeah, if your competition doesn't have one, then it's almost like, how does that?
There's an
how does that
interesting,
sit?
have you ever heard of Everlane, a fashion company? So they've got a really open approach to it, which is a big industry, you know, cotton clothing, I mean, pretty awful as well. But they show every single thing, every drop of water that goes into it, where it's done, the shipping, every single thing. And the transparency, whilst not an EPD, if it's true, and presumably they're audited in some way, I don't know what way it is, that simple explanation through the process of every time you click on a product, you get the information about that product. That type of thing, which is communicable to everybody. Oh, I understand this 6 steps, rather than EPDs or these things which are very complicated. And, you know,
or just splashing carbon neutral
Absolutely,
badge
yeah.
on your website and saying, you know, aren't we great?
Yeah.
You know.
And that goes back to the whole well-being. How is it affecting them, their health? Why would I want to come back into this building? What are you doing for me is really the bigger question from employees now. So this is actually what we're going to be talking about in Toronto for the next roundtable, is looking at accreditation versus how does it affect the end user. So you can get a certification, but will that actually positively impact the people who are using this? And for interior designers, our 3 mandates are actually health, safety, and well-being. It's not about what colors are we using for the walls. It's psychological safety. It's things like, what's the off-gassing look like? What are the materials made of? That's what we need to be focusing on. So it's nice to see our industry shifting back to that, where there's more value being placed on designers in terms of like, this is what we're expecting. Me as the client, this is what I'm expecting. And now looking at our supply chain, how do we do this? Like, how do I create this space for my clients so that they are feeling like this, so that they do feel like, even if they're not getting the accreditation, maybe they're also getting that, but how is this fundamentally impacting them?
Yeah, absolutely, because ultimately every material, every design choice is going to have some impact. So what then is that benefit to that interior environment, to the occupants of that over, potentially a significant number of years of that building structure or interior structure sort of being in place? Mm-hmm.
The support that both ourselves and our competitors give to social enterprises who are geared up to try and improve people's lives in the areas that they operate by skilling them, training them. And that works very much on a modular basis. And as part of the supply chain, it's easier to transport modular product than it is to try and rip up and reuse or even recycle sheet product. Our industry, we've set up in the UK a small manufacturers sustainability group with Milliken and Kate are involved with that. And that's trying to work together as a group of manufacturers what it is that we can try and do to solve this particular problem, because the resources are substantial. And again, that's something I think that will develop over time, and other industries and other competitors within those industries will have to at some point sit around a table and come up with those solutions, because if they don't, we're really not going to make the progress that we really want to. We have to understand, if we go in and do a refurbishment, if it was my product going in on the refurb, it might be Kate's coming out or vice versa. So I'm then got the problem of, how do I recycle? What can I do with the material that isn't even mine? Because the client expectation is, you deal with it. And so it becomes extremely interesting and again a difficult one to try and manage through, unless you start to work together and have some sort of collaboration.
Yeah, we do think there's strength in a collective approach, and it's interesting because sometimes the challenge is not just collective within your particular industry or product category. We'll sometimes get calls of, well, can you take the flooring back if it's mixed in with ceiling panels? And it's like, well, no, because we really don't have the expertise in the ceiling panels. So, it's kind of almost like looking at, how you can sort of do things on scale.
That's what I was going to say. It's the kind of cross-contamination of things. And, the old way of doing things was when they went to strip everything out, it all just went into the same skip. And, then there's that sorting element as well, before you even get into any sort of reprocessing or anything like that, which is another, cost and resources and everything.
And that I think as well is that there is a discord at times between, the main contractor on a build, and you talk to directors who get it, who buy into the process, but then it doesn't then filter through to the guys, the operational management on the site, who often complain, we'd like to do it, but we've got no space to put that bin for that, or to segregate material out.
But it can become part of the contract, right? I think demolition will become very, very, very sophisticated soon, because it's almost like urban mining, right? We have problems of raw materials. Some we don't really have problems yet, but there will be problems, and at the same time it's becoming a cost to send all of these to landfill. So it will end up being part of the contract the client sign with a company that dismount the building to refit it, that they will require no contamination of certain things and how these things can be reused in other projects. I saw a beautiful project by MAD. They are from Oslo. Incredible architect. They literally did a whole refit including the cladding, just by reusing demolition waste from different sites of Oslo. I think it is possible. It requires effort, and effort comes with the requests of clients. So as soon as clients will buy into this process, very quickly things will shift, because that's where the real contract and decision making happens.
Undoubtedly, there would be some sort of an increase in cost. To strip it out carefully to make sure,
and time too. A lot of times you don't have that time.
Well, from a contractual, the ultimate solution is really take that out and do that as a specialized package, and give the next thing is sort of is a grey box, and everything has been stripped out carefully as it needs to be done, and some things go back to the manufacturers, some stay there for reuse, whatever it might be.
If we do want to move it forward, then those guys are going to have to accept that change is going to come, and if they all adopt or have to adopt the same methodologies, then the time and the price factors will all be the same for them. They will all have to spend more time taking it out, and therefore the price will go up, and therefore the time taken to do the job will do that.
Our projects, we have 2 days to do demo and strip out. There's no time. So it actually has to come from the client as a request. It needs to be built into the tender or the RFP, and then shown, how are you going to do this? If you're going to outsource it and someone comes in and they work overnight in order to do the demo, great, but how are you going to do this? But in 2 days, to be able to strip things out and organize them, you have to have that plan ahead of time, so that I can call the team in who are going to come in and take it down and take it off site.
Yeah, that's my point as well. Like, if it's just part of the main overall contract, it's the first things that's going to get squeezed, so they have more time later on,
Maybe another approach though would be to look at it like, you go back to our 1,000 kilograms of carbon or whatever. We have the same event, have the same package for the demolition. And so you have to create X out of 1,000 kilograms of carbon that's embedded or whatever. And then go down the route like, you're saying that as soon as you put it on the tabletop, you can sell it because you have a discrete thing, which is real and understandable. Whereas I say I've got 4 lorry loads of rubbish out there. It's not a discrete thing, and no one understands what it is. And it's that margin that can be put onto this recognisable.
There's also the value of the materials coming out of the build. Do we start to factor that in rather than see it as a waste and a cost? See it as a value. And if people were able to recognise the value of the materials that they were taking out and throwing in the bin, basically, look at it the other way and say, okay, what is the value of the materials coming out?
That's a really good point, because there's quite a lot of furniture dealers now who are kind of tendering to have that kind of like audit part of it. So they want to go in, obviously to build relationships with the end client. They want to go in, they want to see what furniture's there. They then can put a package together of like what they'll take away, what can be reused, maybe by the client or maybe by somebody else. So maybe it's just that type of model, but it's for somebody to come in and actually look at all the more kind of fixed items rather than the kind
we
of
have a
loose
word
furniture.
for this because it's kind of our whole business.
Okay.
Well, a phrase, non-virgin feedstocks. So
Okay.
a tree is a virgin one.
Yeah.
A door is a non-virgin one.
Yes.
And so we're looking at all of these things, and we often speak to clients about bigger projects. And there's one that we're looking at 6,000 square meters of beautiful Carrara marble that's about to be ripped out of a bank building, and we're possibly gonna, if we can get it out reasonably, and it's really difficult, it's a very complicated process, to turn that back into their floor throughout the rebuild of this thing.
Well, shouldn't there be like a marketplace where you quickly put that in
Well,
and then somebody else
and-
bids? Oh, it does
yeah, and it
exist.
does
Okay,
exist,
great.
yeah.
I think it's just, very often it is about connecting, by sharing and kind of discussing things in things like this. I think you can really find value in the whole supply chain. And I work with Carrara Quarries. It's not nice to see how much they've taken out, which is, their business. So why not, remanufacturing it, or even just refitting it, repolishing it, recarving it. So
Taking it out carefully.
yeah, exactly, or taking it out carefully.
There's also an interesting thing about fixing systems, which I don't think is really thought about very much, is that if you design it so it can be taken out, and they do exist, these
And we
things.
talk about that all the time as
I'm
well
sure
with
you do,
regards to the soft cells, because they're on a hinge and push latch, or the ones that are on the wall, that that's on a magnet, it's a steel plate, you can literally pull it off and actually do something with it. And we kind of say to people, well, look, we really want designers now, because instead of, making everything completely bespoke or this curved panel, everything's down to kind of like a millimetre of tolerance. But we're saying now, actually, why don't you design in more of a modular way? And then actually you can take those with you. I think we actually have a project with Emosa on our website where actually, we went from one project where you had the acoustic panels. It was designed in a way that you could actually just take them off the wall, take them off the ceiling, and then put them in their new home. You can reupholster them, which is generally kind of a low carbon kind of solution, because all of the value, all of the worth in the aluminium and the kind of acoustic core, you've paid for that.
So we talked earlier about demolition, it's on a time, and we don't want to extend the time or the cost. A adhesive-free product is an attractive sell to contractors because it's easier to fit, it's quicker, there's less mess. At the other end, for recyclers, there's less contaminant to have to deal with to recycle a material back into new product. So I think in our industry that's been one of the step changes that I've seen over the last 10 years in terms of manufacturers developing better products, better solutions, thinking about those end-of-life options.
The take-back programs, I think they're growing in popularity. Is there anything that maybe you can expand on in terms of areas of success?
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of challenges in terms of getting materials back and recycling them, but I think we're definitely seeing a shift now of it moving from being something that people want to know is technically possible to actually being willing to really ensure it happens by working through, there can be so many stages of the process with either strip out companies, flooring contractors, so many people sort of in that food chain of sort of working on a refurbishment. I think we've certainly seen a shift within our markets in France. There's been some legislative change that has demanded an amount of product to be reused into new schemes, and that is helping to really drive that whole take-back process and providers to get that product back in. And I think in the UK, I'm starting to see a shift now of people just being much more aware of that whole value of repurposing and it almost being like visible.
We see that as well, like I was saying before about the really product where people are kind of interested in kind of like what can we give back, like how can we kind of use some of these high quality materials that we've already put into our buildings. I think that's something for us, it is longevity as part of our DNA, and I think that's really interesting for us because sometimes we'll get designers, maybe people in the industry challenge us and say, well, maybe I don't want it to last 10 years. And I said, well, you might not want it in your project for that long because maybe you're going to do a refit in 5 to 7 years. But if that material on that chair is of a high enough quality, then potentially when somebody's going in there, they're taking it out, maybe that doesn't need to be reupholstered. Maybe that's something that can just be having a deep clean, and then that can be resold to somebody else. But I think it's an interesting kind of area, and of course there's new EU legislation that kind of says, well, actually, with regards to textiles, that if you make it, you still own it. You have to kind of like have a way of sort of giving that product a second life, repurposing it. It's still yours. It can't just go to landfill. It can't be incinerated.
So I wouldn't know if I had finished this project and hadn't been called back to refit it. I wouldn't know. It's whoever's organizing that from the client side.
The links in the chain start to break down, because there isn't, if you like, a whole build ownership. So, with the best will in the world.
If you're looking at a typical building, you're looking at different tenants every 3, 5, 10, 15 years.
I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's very, very difficult. But we understand what could happen.
Yeah.
We have to figure out a way of how then we manage it from the birth of the building, if you like, to the deconstruction.
Well, there's also another bit. There's a lot of regulation going in, but there's not a lot of regulation coming out. Mm-hmm. And without that regulation, it doesn't matter what you do. And that's going to be an issue for the next phase, I'd say, of refurbishment or building, is that sort of twin sets of regulations. And until they exist, which I don't know, maybe you might know a bit more about it, or you guys might. I have no idea if it exists, but my hope for it existing is pretty low.
Not in that level of detail that's required to actually help drive circularity, decarbonisation or whatever.
Input,
it's
not
control, output.
And
because we can specify how it gets installed, but until we're looking at how it's demolished and stripped out.
But are you saying, like, you know, some paneling goes over here and it's installed the way it's supposed to be, and then a few years later somebody comes along and paints over it in an oil-based paint or something that shouldn't have been, and then it's completely changed?
It could even be replaced. You know, somebody has a you know, wants to change the design of a room, and they start altering all the materials, and they don't then maintain the O&M manual. Yeah. So what are you left with?
Yes.
You know, and if you don't know what the material is, A, how do you find out? Because you want to know what's contained in it, because what's contained in it might not now meet current legislative requirement. So therefore...
But it may be also, sorry, that we need to fight the bigger battles, right? Like in a building, if you have 10 square meters of, you know, fiber flooring, it's probably not as prominent as, you know, 2,000 square meters of plasterboard, or, you know, I don't know, 5 tons of bricks. So we need to also start shooting the bigger, you know, battles.
Carbon values.
And the carbon value, because as long as you put your availability there to say, I'll explain you how you can give me back the material, or like help you dry fix it, I think you have done the best you could at the moment. Obviously, I think it goes down a bit to the client as well to put their foot down and say, this is my building. I want to update all my manuals so I know exactly what's going on. And the day I want to refurbish this, I can actually, you know, this massive commercial campaign saying how great I've been by just having every single item take back or recycled. I think, you know, we are starting this. We're just scratching the surfaces of...
And Moser's both designer and contractor. And we work across consultancy as well as D&B, and we've definitely seen a greater uptake in sustainability and design and build projects. Are you guys also seeing this in the broader industry? Are you seeing a shift between what's been specified historically and what's now being requested?
I think definitely it's at the forefront of kind of every communication. So when we go in to see architects and designers, when we're getting that email, when we're receiving the phone call to say, hey, we've just won this great new project, can you come in and show us some materials? It tends to be the first question now. Can you bring the most sustainable products? Can you bring the products with recycled content? You know, can you bring the products that have an interesting story around sustainability? So I think it's just, whereas that might have been a kind of add-in before, or something that if we had a new product that came out and we wanted to tell the story, it would be us kind of like, you know, bringing it, but now it's actually a request. So I think it's making sure that we have strong partners and working with, you know, the manufacturers that we supply to ensure that actually if it is D&B and it's price sensitive and it's time sensitive, that we know we can kind of deliver our fast runners, and our fast runners are also sustainable because we're not just designing new.
Do you think that that is only your responsibility? Obviously you're coming from here and going backwards, whereas I'm coming from here and going forward, so it's easier for me. But I would say that the specifier has responsibility in this as well. If they want product X, which does all this, and you are a business that has to make money and employ people, yada, 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 is it not a question of it's some shared responsibility? Their supply chains have to be built, general, any specifier, to achieve these things. It is not a mutual thing. I often feel like, oh yes, here you go, make this amazing product for us. You make it, and when you've made it, wonderful, we'll buy it. Which is a nice way of doing it, but also these things, like you will have to redesign things by 2030, that's not far away.
No, it's not.
And it's a lot of effort and a lot of money, I'd imagine. If you were to do a premium, if you were to do like a tax, let's say there's 10% on every single one of these products until we've got it.
And we've started talking as well to say, well, look, do we need to launch as many collections a year as we have historically? And can we explain that to our clients to say, well, look, we're trying to design to the best of our abilities, but we're also trying to make sure that we're not kind of just launching novelty products for headlines. And I think, you know, it is a big shift. It's a big shift for you to sort of probably say to your clients, maybe, you know, it's going to be not more generic, but maybe there has to be kind of like, you know, an exception.
I don't think it's
there.
an issue.
No.
I don't think it's as big of an issue as you think it is. Designers are inherently used to constraints. It could be the constraints of time or budget, it could be the building, it could be sustainability, what have you. We're so used to building within those constraints that if we were told these are the only 6 products that are sustainable enough to do this, that's what we'll work with. But we're also finding, especially for the super sustainable end of the product sphere, there aren't a whole lot that are really making us excited, because we want more. We want to push it further. We want to know what you're doing. That's why I said it doesn't have to be super sexy. Just give me the stories. Like, tell us what you're doing, because our designers are feeling both underwhelmed and overwhelmed at the same time. They're underwhelmed with what's happening in our industry in terms of what we're really changing, and they're overwhelmed with a whole bunch of products that we're not necessarily feeling are inherently good for our planet. So
I think it's how you look at it as well, isn't it? Like, you know, we have products where, you know, it's really challenging. I think we've touched on it earlier, of actually kind of getting kind of recycled materials back that don't have the kind of foreign elements in there that are going to kind of affect our production. They're going to affect our 10-year warranty. That, you know, it needs to be of a certain quality. So we kind of find it's easier for us to work with post-industrial waste. We know exactly what's in it because it's our waste. And I think, you know, that's one of the nice partnerships that we have. So we have 6 manufacturers, 6 mills kind of globally, and we either own them outright or we have a majority share in them, and that actually gives us a huge amount of control in the kind of production process. But it was actually Wooltex here in Huddersfield that make 80% of our wool. They came to us and said, hey, we've got all this waste. So we're literally kind of sweeping the floor and collecting all this waste and then using it in our products.
how are you seeing the design industry shifting the conversation and specification of your products?
I think we're seeing at the moment some of that shift in specification being absolutely, as you said, the sustainability question is now the first one, but there's a lot of screening at that company level before you get into the product dialogue. So people are kind of wanting to look at where they're spending their money as being, is this with companies that have the right sort of ethical policies, have the right kind of labour practices, all that kind of thing that just goes into the holistic transparency before you get down to the product transparency. And I think part of that screening might be to help that issue you were saying of being kind of overwhelmed and underwhelmed. It's kind of at that stage, it's kind of already there's a little bit of screening, and now what are the product choices from having done that sort of first filtering process. And then from there, it's then into the product specifics, but not just the environmental ones. It's then also that people side of it. So what's it going to do for the people as well? So that transparency around ingredients, things like that too.
How can we contribute to the education system to embed sustainability into the next generation of talent?
So obviously we really like to go into universities. We like to educate people from the beginning because this is the future. These are the future designers. You know, we also do a lot with REBA, CPDs, and we always encourage the interns and the graduates and the new designers to attend these, to really inspire them and to really get a great picture as to, you know, why our products as opposed to everybody else's, but also what they really need to be thinking about when they are specifying a decorative laminate, for example. It's something that we really feel passionate about at ARPA, and we like to, educate from the beginning. I know I did a design degree, and I really appreciated manufacturers coming in to talk to us when I was studying.
We find it really valuable from our side as well to get that input, because I think there is a lot of new thinking as well in that younger generation in terms of things like the green chemistries, just a totally different angle of perspective of looking at some of the challenges, and that can be really helpful from an organisational point of view too.
I was gonna say, actually, I learn more than I actually get sometimes. I think it's almost the opposite. And we recently even started mentoring some, I would call them almost like pioneers of new materials, to help them finding companies that can sort of take on board their recipes and come up with new materials. I mean, I recently talked with a student that has an amazing project where they're using oysters to actually make glass. So most of the silica is actually from actually seashells, which is fantastic idea. And it's actually a very old process, it's not even new. So sometimes students come up with things that we forgot. And because they have this sensitivity and also this freedom of playing, and in the UK, amazing facilities, of course, it's actually quite exciting to work at university.
Are there any other companies outside of our industry that you would like to emulate with their sustainability initiatives?
chemists are looking at nature to understand processes and understand how nature does it, which is quite interesting because we have spent probably all of this time to try to differentiate ourselves and get into cycles where we created very technical materials that we need to recycle in very technical loops. And then nature does it in a very simple way. Like an example, which is the simplest one, is the spider silk. Spider silk is one of the strongest fibers in the world, probably. You can actually, I read once that you can stop an airplane with a web as thick as a pencil because of the strength of the fiber. And obviously, the fashion industry is catching all of these new things because they are very good at it. But there are already pieces of clothing using this type of fibers. And what is exciting, I think, is that not only chemistry can replicate these fibers through chemists, but you can make it in a lab. At the end of the day, what the spider does after using the fiber, it's eating it. It's completely, part of the cycle. So you could put it into a forest and it would biodegrade. And I find this quite exciting because we have built like this for a very long time. You were mentioning lime. You could do partition bricks in hemp and lime and, absorb carbon. That's your carbon storage. Building could become a massive carbon storage, not actually a problem. Like you could just say, that's the solution, right? You could do green roofs and actually repopulate with species the whole cities. So I think we are facing a transformation and a lot of young chemistry are playing with it and creating new products that are actually almost like within this cycle of nature.
We're in the middle of an Innovate UK project to do exactly that with spent brewer's grain, turning it into a binder. There's a huge amount of it. It's bioethanol industry as well, creates a huge amount. And doing exactly that, basically you mush it up, dry it, powder it, it turns into a very, very good adhesive. But also, it's also interesting that the government, the UK government and the European Union has got a lot of money going into these streams. There's a big algae project going on, very similar to what we're doing, but just with different feedstock. That's interesting.
I think it's like you have so many natural glues, like mycelium, incredible. Like I know several projects that are actually building houses by growing mushrooms and with the half-ice then grow bricks for their houses. And once you accept the fact that actually a material could last 4 or 5 years, that it's almost like the building could sort of, go into like a forest at the end of its life and sort of have a new refit that doesn't need technical recycling, which is an interesting point. Maybe that's next generation of our own conversation here.
Thank you everyone for participating today, for coming in, for traveling from afar, and some of you from not so far. Hopefully we can do this again soon, so thank you.